in the heart of an endless desert, where the sun blazed like a vengeful god and sand stretched as far as the eye could see, a lone human soldier trudged through the unforgiving terrain. His name was Arlen Voss, a man whose reputation for resilience had earned him both admiration and pity among his comrades. He wasn't particularly tall or broad-shouldered, but there was something about Arlen that made people remember him, a quiet determination in his eyes, a stubbornness etched into every line on his face. Arlen had been separated from his unit during a botched reconnaissance mission. The details were hazy even to him now. All he knew was that one moment they were surrounded by their convoy, and the next, chaos erupted. A sandstorm swallowed everything, scattering them across miles of barren wasteland. When the storm finally subsided, Arlen found himself utterly alone, with nothing but his rifle, a canteen that was almost empty, and a dwindling hope of survival. The days blurred together under the relentless heat. By the time he stumbled upon what looked like an oasis rising out of the horizon, Arlen's body felt more machine than man, each step powered by sheer will rather than strength. It wasn't water he saw first, though. Instead, it was shapes moving against the shimmering mirage-like air. At first glance, they appeared human, but as he drew closer, the truth became undeniable. These figures were not of Earth. They were alien women, their forms sleek and otherworldly. Their skin glimmered faintly, shifting colors like sunlight dancing on oil slicks. They wore garments that seemed woven from light itself, flowing around them without being touched by the wind. Their faces held expressions that were neither kind nor cruel, just curious. There were 3 of them, standing near what appeared to be some sort of crystalline structure jutting out of the ground, glowing softly despite the harsh daylight. Arlen froze, torn between instinctual fear and desperate need. He hadn't seen another living soul in days, let alone anyone who might offer help. But these beings weren't exactly friendly-looking neighbors either. Still, hunger gnawed at his insides, and thirst clawed at his throat like a wild animal. If this was how his story ended, with him collapsing at the feet of extraterrestrial strangers, then so be it. One of the women stepped forward, her movements fluid and deliberate. She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to decipher a puzzle. Then she spoke, not in words, but in sounds that resonated deep within Arlen's mind. Somehow, he understood. "You are dying," she said, her voice calm yet devoid of emotion. It was less a question and more a statement of fact. He nodded weakly, too exhausted to argue. "I don't suppose you've got any water," he croaked, half-joking, fully expecting silence in return. To his astonishment, the woman turned back toward her companions and gestured toward the crystalline structure. Another of the trio approached, carrying something cupped in her hands. As she drew nearer, Arlen realized it wasn't water. It was liquid, yes, but it shimmered unnaturally, pulsating with hues of violet and green. The substance seemed alive, writhing gently in its container. The lead woman extended the offering toward him. "Drink," she commanded, though her tone remained neutral. Arlen hesitated. This wasn't exactly the hydration break he'd imagined. Poison? Hallucinogen? Some alien equivalent of a spiked drink? Any rational person would have declined. But Arlen wasn't feeling particularly rational anymore. His lips cracked and bleeding, his stomach empty save for acid. He reached out trembling fingers and took the makeshift vessel. "It's milk?" he asked aloud, incredulous, as the scent hit him, a mix of sweetness and something metallic, like copper left out in the rain. The woman inclined her head again. "It will sustain you." Sustain him. Or kill him. Either way, death by dehydration loomed larger than whatever risks this strange concoction posed. With a shaky breath, Arlen lifted the cup to his lips and drank. The taste was indescribable, both repulsive and intoxicating, like swallowing fire wrapped in silk. For a split second, he thought he might vomit it back up. But then warmth spread through his chest, flooding his veins with energy. His vision sharpened, the world snapping into focus as though someone had wiped away a foggy lens. Colors grew brighter, sounds clearer. Even the oppressive heat of the desert seemed less unbearable. What is this stuff?" he stammered, staring at the now empty container in awe. The lead woman regarded him coolly. "Nourishment." And just like that, she turned away, leaving Arlen standing there, bewildered but undeniably revitalized. He wanted to thank her, to ask questions, to understand why she, and her companions, had helped him when they clearly owed him nothing. But before he could muster the words, the trio began walking away, disappearing into the shimmering distance as quickly as they had appeared. For a while, Arlen simply stood there, clutching the empty vessel and marveling at the bizarre turn of events. Was this real? Had he hallucinated the entire encounter? No, the effects of the alien milk were undeniable. His body hummed with vitality, his muscles no longer screaming in protest with every movement. Whatever those women were, whatever their intentions, they had saved his life. But salvation came with complications. As Arlen pressed onward, following the faint trail left behind by his rescuers, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Shadows flitted at the edges of his vision, too quick to catch but impossible to ignore. The desert, once silent save for the whisper of the wind, now seemed alive with unseen presences. Every step forward felt heavier, as though invisible weights were tied to his boots. Then came the voices. At first, they were faint, little more than murmurs carried on the breeze. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, clearer. They spoke in languages Arlen didn't recognize, yet somehow understood fragments of. Words like intruder and trespasser echoed in his mind, accompanied by images of towering structures buried beneath the sands and glowing symbols etched into stone. The visions were fleeting, slipping through his consciousness like smoke, but they left him uneasy. "Great," he muttered under his breath, scanning the horizon nervously. "Now I'm hearing things. Perfect." His sarcasm did little to mask the growing dread in his gut. Something, or someone, wasn't happy about his presence here. And judging by the increasing intensity of the whispers, it wouldn't be long before they made themselves known. By the time night fell, Arlen decided to make camp near a cluster of jagged rocks that offered some semblance of shelter. He lit a small fire using scraps of dried vegetation he'd scavenged earlier, grateful for the brief respite from the cold. As he stared into the flickering flames, his thoughts drifted back to the alien women. Who were they? What were they doing in this desolate place? And why had they chosen to help him? Before he could dwell too deeply on these mysteries, a sound snapped him out of his reverie, a soft rustling, followed by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on sand. Arlen grabbed his rifle, heart pounding as he scanned the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the starlit sky. It was one of the women, her shimmering form illuminated faintly by the firelight. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing in his mind as before. Unlike her earlier detachment, however, this time there was an edge to her tone, urgency, perhaps even fear. "Yeah, well, neither should you," Arlen shot back, lowering his weapon slightly. "Care to explain what's going on?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "This place is sacred. Forbidden. You carry something dangerous." "Dangerous?" Arlen frowned, patting himself down reflexively. "I'm just a guy trying to survive. Trust me, I'm not exactly a threat." Her gaze hardened. "Not knowingly, perhaps. But ignorance does not shield you from consequence." Before Arlen could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. The fire sputtered and died, plunging the area into darkness. From the void beyond the rocks came a chorus of guttural growls, each one deeper and more menacing than the last. The woman cursed under her breath. Or at least, that's what Arlen assumed she was doing, given the sharp burst of mental static that accompanied her reaction. "Stay close," she ordered, stepping toward him. Her hand brushed his arm briefly, and the touch sent a jolt through his system, like static electricity amplified tenfold. Without waiting for a response, she darted into the shadows, motioning for him to follow. Arlen obeyed, adrenaline overriding caution. Whatever was hunting them, it was big and fast. He could hear its heavy footfalls thundering closer, punctuated by snarls that made his blood run cold. Behind him, the glowing eyes of the creature pierced the darkness, reflecting the dim light of the stars. "Friendly neighborhood wildlife, I assume?" Arlen quipped, struggling to keep pace with the alien woman as they wove through the rocky labyrinth. "No," she replied tersely. "Worse." "Of course it is," he muttered, ducking as a massive claw swiped at the air above his head. "Because why wouldn't it be? Despite the chaos, Arlen couldn't help but notice the surreal beauty of their surroundings. The alien woman moved with a grace that defied logic, her luminous form casting eerie shadows on the rocks. The desert itself seemed alive, its dunes shifting subtly as though breathing in rhythm with the chase. Even the stars overhead appeared brighter, their light tinged with an unnatural hue that lent the scene an almost dreamlike quality. As they rounded a bend, the woman suddenly skidded to a halt, raising a hand to signal silence. Ahead of them loomed a narrow crevice barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. She pointed to it urgently, then shoved Arlen toward the opening without ceremony. "In," she commanded, turning to face the approaching monster. "I'm not leaving you out here." Arlen protested, gripping his rifle tightly. "You have no choice," she snapped, her voice cutting through his defiance like a blade. "If you die, everything dies." That stopped him cold. Everything. What did she mean by that? Before he could press further, the creature lunged, forcing the woman to dive aside with inhuman agility. Seizing the opportunity, Arlen scrambled into the crevice, squeezing through the tight space as quickly as he could. Once inside, he risked a glance back, and immediately wished he hadn't. The creature was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Towering over the alien woman, it resembled a grotesque fusion of insect and reptile, its armored body gleaming in the moonlight. Multiple eyes blinked in unison, each one radiating malice. Long, spindly legs clicked against the rocks as it advanced, jaws snapping hungrily. But the woman didn't falter. With a swift motion, she raised her arms, and the air around her shimmered violently. Energy crackled in the space between her palms, coalescing into a sphere of brilliant light. She hurled it at the beast, the impact sending shockwaves rippling through the sand. The creature roared in fury, recoiling momentarily, but only momentarily. Arlen watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. For every strike the woman landed, the creature retaliated with ferocious precision. Sparks flew, sand exploded, and the very ground trembled beneath their clash. Despite her skill, it was clear she couldn't hold out forever. Desperation clawed at Arlen's chest, urging him to do something. Anything, but what could he possibly contribute against such a monstrosity? Then, inspiration struck. Fumbling in his pack, he retrieved a flare gun he'd salvaged from the wreckage of his unit's convoy. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, it could buy them enough time to escape. Taking aim, he fired the flare directly at the creature's head. The resulting explosion blinded it temporarily, causing it to stumble backward with a deafening screech. "Now!" Arlen shouted, scrambling out of the crevice to grab the woman's arm. Together, they bolted into the deeper recesses of the canyon, the creature's enraged bellows fading into the distance behind them. When they finally collapsed in exhaustion, hidden within a shallow cave, the woman turned to Arlen with an expression that bordered on disbelief. "You are unexpected," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with something akin to amusement. "Yeah, well, surprises are kind of my thing," Arlen replied, grinning weakly despite the situation. "Though I gotta say, your version of thank you is a lot more dramatic than I'm used to." She didn't laugh, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward ever so slightly. In that moment, Arlen realized she wasn't just a mysterious alien savior. She was someone fighting her own battles, carrying burdens he couldn't begin to comprehend. And somehow, absurdly, he felt grateful for the chance to stand beside her, even if only for a little while. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Arlen found himself reflecting on the events of the previous night. The alien woman, whose name he still didn't know, sat cross-legged beside him, her luminous form casting a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the harshness of their surroundings. Despite the danger they had narrowly escaped, there was an odd sense of calm between them, as though the shared ordeal had forged an unspoken bond. "So," Arlen began, breaking the silence, "care to tell me why we're hiding in a cave instead of, I dunno, finding a nice 5-star hotel somewhere?" The woman glanced at him sidelong, her expression unreadable. "This place is safer than most. The creature cannot follow us here." "Ah, right. Because monsters always respect boundaries." "Totally makes sense." She ignored his sarcasm, focusing instead on the task of examining the scratches on her arm. Arlen noticed the wounds healing rapidly, the gashes closing up as though stitched by invisible hands. Alien biology, he supposed, though it still boggled his mind. Look, he continued, leaning forward earnestly, I get that you're busy saving the universe or whatever, but I'd really appreciate some answers. Like, who are you? Why are you helping me? And what exactly am I carrying that's so dangerous? Her gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost human, she relented. My name is Silra, she said, her voice resonating softly in his mind. I am a guardian of sorts. My kind has watched over this land for millennia, protecting it from those who would exploit its power. Power? Arlen echoed, frowning. What kind of power? Silra hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she gestured toward the horizon, where the crystalline structure from earlier shimmered faintly in the distance. That is a Nexus, a convergence point of energies older than your species. It holds knowledge, potential, and peril. Many seek to claim it for themselves, believing it will grant them dominion over worlds. Sounds like bad news, Arlen remarked dryly. But what does it have to do with me? Her eyes narrowed slightly. You carry a fragment of the Nexus within you. A shard embedded in your essence, likely during your encounter with the storm. It calls to others, those who would use it for destruction. Arlen blinked, processing her words. Wait, you're saying I've got some alien MacGuffin stuck in me? How is that even possible? It is not meant to be, Silra admitted, her tone tinged with frustration. Such a thing should never occur. Yet here we are. Well, that explains why everyone seems so interested in killing me, Arlen muttered, running a hand through his hair. Guess I should start charging admission. Silra didn't smile, but there was a flicker of amusement in her gaze. Your humor is peculiar, but it serves you well. Thanks, I think, Arlen replied, chuckling nervously. So, what's the plan? Do we yank this thing out of me, or do I become permanent bait for giant lizard bugs? The shard cannot simply be removed, Silra explained. It has integrated itself into your being. To remove it would destroy you. Fantastic, Arlen groaned, slumping against the cave wall. Just when I thought today couldn't get worse. There may be another way, Silra added, her voice taking on a note of cautious optimism. There exists a ritual, an ancient method of containing such anomalies. But it requires access to the Nexus itself. Great. So we march straight into enemy territory, fight off whatever horrors are lurking there, and hope nobody notices we're trespassing in the meantime. Sounds like a solid plan. It is dangerous, Silra acknowledged. But staying here is no safer. The shard's presence grows stronger with each passing hour. Soon, it will attract more than just predators. Arlen sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Why do I feel like I signed up for this without reading the fine print? Silra tilted her head, studying him curiously. You humans are strange. You face uncertainty with jests and bravado, yet beneath it lies courage. Perhaps that is why the shard chose you. Chose me, Arlen repeated, incredulous. Let's not give it too much credit, okay? I'm pretty sure it hitched a ride because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps, Silra conceded. But fate often disguises itself as coincidence. Before Arlen could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the canyon, shaking loose grains of sand from the cave ceiling. Both of them tensed, exchanging wary glances. They've found us, Silra said grimly, rising to her feet. We must move quickly. Right. Because sitting still has worked so well for us so far, Arlen quipped, grabbing his rifle and following her out of the cave. The journey to the Nexus proved to be anything but straightforward. The desert seemed determined to test their resolve at every turn, throwing obstacles in their path that ranged from treacherous sinkholes to sudden gusts of wind that threatened to knock them off their feet. Through it all, Silra moved with unwavering purpose, her steps steady even as the terrain grew increasingly hostile. Arlen, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, his body protesting the relentless pace despite the lingering effects of the alien milk. As they neared the crystalline structure, the air grew thick with an electric charge, making the hairs on Arlen's arms stand on end. The Nexus loomed ahead, its surface refracting light in dazzling patterns that shifted constantly, like a living kaleidoscope. Surrounding it was a perimeter of jagged spires, each one taller than the last, forming a natural barrier that seemed designed to deter intruders. "This doesn't look ominous at all," Arlen remarked, eyeing the spires warily. "Should we knock first, or just barge in?" "We proceed carefully," Silra instructed, her voice low but firm. "The Nexus is guarded not only by physical defenses but also by illusions. Trust your instincts, and mine." "Got it. Instincts. Check." Arlen adjusted his grip on his rifle, scanning the area for signs of movement. "Any tips on spotting these illusions?" "They will appear as reflections of your fears," Silra replied cryptically. "Remember, they cannot harm you unless you allow them to." "Comforting," Arlen muttered under his breath. "Nothing like facing your worst nightmares to brighten your day." True to her warning, the illusions began manifesting almost immediately. As they navigated the maze of spires, shadowy figures materialized in their path, twisted versions of Arlen's memories. He saw glimpses of his childhood home engulfed in flames, his parents calling out to him in anguish. He saw fallen comrades reaching for help, their faces contorted in agony. Each vision tugged at his emotions, threatening to overwhelm him with guilt and despair. But Silra was there, her presence grounding him. Whenever the illusions grew too vivid, she would place a hand on his shoulder, anchoring him to reality. "Focus," she urged, her voice cutting through the haze. "These are lies. They hold no power over you." With her guidance, Arlen managed to push past the phantoms, though not without cost. By the time they reached the base of the Nexus, sweat poured down his face, and his hands trembled from the effort of resisting the psychological assault. Silra, too, showed signs of strain, her normally composed demeanor fraying slightly around the edges. "This is it," she said, gazing up at the towering crystal. "Prepare yourself." "For what?" Arlen asked, his voice hoarse. "For whatever comes next," she replied simply, stepping forward. As they approached the Nexus, its surface began to ripple, as though responding to their presence. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through Arlen's bones and setting his teeth on edge. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a hidden chamber below. Stairs spiraled downward, leading into darkness. "Well, this looks promising," Arlen deadpanned, peering into the abyss. "Ladies first." Silra spared him a glance that was equal parts exasperation and amusement before descending into the depths. Arlen followed closely, his senses on high alert. The staircase seemed endless, winding deeper and deeper until the light from above vanished entirely. Only the faint glow emanating from Silra illuminated their path. At the bottom, they entered a cavernous space dominated by a massive pool of liquid light. The shard within Arlen pulsed in sync with the pool, drawing him inexorably closer. Silra positioned herself beside him, her expression grave. "The ritual begins now," she said, raising her hands. "Do not resist." Before Arlen could ask what that meant, tendrils of energy lashed out from the pool, wrapping around him like serpents. Pain shot through his body, sharp and searing, as the shard within him reacted violently to the Nexus's pull. He screamed, dropping to his knees as the world dissolved into chaos. Through the haze of agony, he heard Silra chanting in a language older than time itself. Her voice resonated with power, weaving a protective cocoon around him even as the forces of the Nexus sought to tear him apart. The battle raged on, a maelstrom of light and shadow, until finally, with a deafening roar, the shard detached itself from Arlen's essence and plunged into the pool. The relief was instantaneous, leaving Arlen gasping for air as the tendrils released him. Collapsing onto the ground, he stared up at Silra, who knelt beside him, her features softened with concern. "It is done," she said softly. "You are free." "Free," Arlen echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Feels more like I got hit by a truck." Silra allowed herself a small smile. "You endured more than most could bear. Rest now. We are safe, for the moment." As exhaustion claimed him, Arlen closed his eyes, the weight of the ordeal finally catching up to him. For the first time in days, he felt truly at peace, secure in the knowledge that he had faced the impossible and survived. But deep down, he knew their journey was far from over. When Arlen awoke, the cavern was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The pool of liquid light that had once pulsed with chaotic energy now shimmered calmly, its surface reflecting the faint outlines of constellations he didn't recognize. Silra sat nearby, her luminous form dimmed but still radiant, as though she too had been drained by the ritual. She looked up as he stirred, her expression unreadable yet oddly comforting. "How long was I out?" Arlen asked groggily, pushing himself into a sitting position. His body felt lighter, almost weightless, as if the shard's removal had lifted not just the physical burden but an emotional one as well. "Not long," Silra replied. "Time flows differently here. What felt like hours to you may have been mere moments." Arlen nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. "And the shard? It's contained now." "For now," Silra said cautiously. "The Nexus has absorbed it, neutralizing its influence. But such power cannot remain dormant forever. Eventually, it will seek release again." "Great. So we've bought ourselves some time, but the apocalypse is still on the table." Arlen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What happens next? Do we wait for round 2, or do we try to figure out how to fix this permanently?" Silra hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the glowing pool. "There is a way. An ancient artifact, a key, exists that can seal the Nexus entirely, preventing any further disturbances. But it was lost eons ago, scattered across your world. Finding it would require leaving this place and venturing into unknown territories." Arlen raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we'd have to go back to Earth? Back to civilization?" "Yes," Silra confirmed. "But know this, returning will not be without risk. Those who hunt you will sense your absence from the shard and redouble their efforts to find you. And there are others, powerful entities, who may see you as a threat simply because of what you've survived." Arlen let out a low whistle. "Sounds like signing up for another suicide mission. Why does trouble always follow me around like a stray dog?" Silra tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "Perhaps because you attract it. Or perhaps because you are stronger than you realize." "Flattery isn't going to make me feel better about all this," Arlen muttered, though he couldn't help but chuckle. "All right, fine. Let's say I agree to this wild goose chase. Where do we start looking for this key thing?" "The first fragment lies within the ruins of an old temple buried beneath the sands of your Sahara Desert," Silra explained. "It is guarded by trials meant to test both mind and spirit. Only those deemed worthy may claim it." "Of course it is," Arlen groaned, shaking his head. "Because apparently, my life motto is, no pain, no gain." "Do not underestimate yourself," Silra said firmly. "You have already proven capable of facing challenges most would flee from. Together, we can succeed." Her confidence surprised him. Despite everything they'd been through, the danger, the uncertainty, the sheer absurdity of it all, she believed in him. That realization stirred something deep inside Arlen, a spark of determination he hadn't felt in years. "Okay," he said finally, standing up and brushing sand off his clothes. "Let's do this. But if I end up getting eaten by another giant lizard bug, I'm blaming you." Silra's smile widened ever so slightly. "Fair enough." The journey back to Earth was surreal. They emerged from the desert, stepping through what seemed like a rippling curtain of light, only to find themselves miles away from where Arlen had originally stumbled upon Silra and her companions. The transition left him disoriented, but the sight of familiar landmarks, the distant silhouette of mountains, the dry scrubland stretching endlessly, grounded him once more. As they prepared to set off toward the Sahara, Arlen paused, turning to Silra with a thoughtful expression. "Hey, thanks. For everything. I don't think I'd still be alive if it weren't for you." Silra regarded him quietly, her multi-hued eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Your survival is not solely my doing. You chose to fight, even when hope seemed lost. That is a strength few possess." "Well, I guess that makes us quite the team then," Arlen said with a grin. "Alien guardian and human screw-up. Who'd have thought?" For the first time since they'd met, Silra laughed, a sound so unexpected and melodic that it caught Arlen off guard. "Indeed," she said, her tone lighter than before. "Let us hope our partnership proves fruitful." With renewed purpose, they began their trek toward the heart of the Sahara. Along the way, Arlen found himself marveling at the strange connection that had formed between them. Despite their differences, they complemented each other in ways neither could have anticipated. Silra's wisdom and resilience balanced his impulsiveness and humor, while his adaptability and resourcefulness provided a counterpoint to her methodical nature. Days turned into weeks as they navigated the harsh terrain, facing new challenges at every turn. Sandstorms threatened to bury them alive, mirages lured them astray, and hostile creatures stalked them under cover of darkness. Yet through it all, they persevered, drawing strength from each other and the shared goal that bound them together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the entrance to the ancient temple. Carved into the side of a massive dune, its stone facade bore intricate carvings depicting celestial patterns and mythical beasts. A sense of reverence washed over Arlen as he stood before it, acutely aware of the significance of what lay ahead. "This is it," Silra said solemnly. "Beyond this threshold lies the first trial. Are you ready?" Arlen took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever awaited them. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together, they stepped into the shadows of the temple, the heavy doors closing behind them with a resounding thud. Inside, the air was cool and still, filled with the scent of aged stone and forgotten secrets. Torches flared to life along the walls, casting flickering light onto a series of chambers connected by narrow passageways. The trials were grueling, testing not only their physical endurance but also their mental fortitude. Puzzles required logic and patience, illusions preyed on their deepest fears, and traps demanded quick reflexes and unwavering trust in one another. Through it all, Arlen and Silra relied on their growing bond, communicating wordlessly at times and supporting each other when the weight of the challenge became overwhelming. At last, they reached the inner sanctum, where the fragment of the key rested atop a pedestal carved from obsidian. It pulsed faintly, resonating with the same energy that had emanated from the Nexus. As Arlen approached, he felt a surge of clarity, as though the artifact recognized him as its rightful bearer. "You must take it," Silra urged, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Only you can wield it." Arlen hesitated, memories of the shard's destructive potential flashing through his mind. "What if I mess this up? What if I make things worse?" "You won't," Silra said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You have come too far to doubt yourself now." Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Arlen reached out and grasped the fragment. Instantly, warmth spread through his palm, followed by a flood of images, visions of worlds intertwined, of balance restored, of harmony achieved. He understood then that the key wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of unity, a reminder that even amidst chaos, hope could prevail. When he turned back to Silra, his eyes shone with newfound resolve. "We're going to finish this," he declared. "Together." She nodded, pride evident in her gaze. "Yes, together." As they exited the temple, the sun rising over the horizon painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, yet somehow beautiful in its desolation. With the first fragment secured and their mission clear, Arlen and Silra set off toward the horizon, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, Arlen felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He wasn't just a soldier lost in the desert anymore. He was part of something greater, a story written in stars and destined to reshape the cosmos. And as they walked side by side, the wind carrying whispers of promise and peril alike, Arlen knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them together.